My name's Carrie Boyle. Thank you for joining our California Coastal Resilience Network webinar today. I'm the coordinator of the network and a state Sea Grant Fellow at the Coastal Conservancy. Before we begin, I wanted to share a quick technical announcement. Every once in a while, GoToWebinar seems to have a glitch where one attendee sees a black screen when the presenter is sharing their screen. So let me know if you're the unlucky one that this happens to. If you see a black screen, just send me a quick message in the chat box and we'll try to fix it. I have a few quick announcements about upcoming events before we start today's webinar. The UC Irvine Coastal Resilience Workshop is starting this afternoon. That's July 18th, and it's going on until tomorrow, so maybe we'll see some of you there. You're probably also aware that the California Adaptation Forum is occurring in Sacramento from August 27th to the 29th. We have a few network events occurring there. The first is a meetup at Golden Road Brewing at the end of the first day on that Monday. So we hope to see you there. And the second is a workshop on Wednesday afternoon about expanding professional networks to accelerate adaptation. I'll be presenting about the Coastal Resilience Network in a quick snapshot presentation alongside several other networks. And we'll explore what's working and what's missing among those networks and plan to especially talk about how to take meaningful actions towards achieving equity and environmental justice within the networks and their scope of work. So it should be a really great conversation, and we hope to see you there as well. So on to today's webinar. Today we'll be diving into two tools that are available for FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program's Community Rating System, or CRS. And I have shared links to both of those in the chat box, and they're also available in a handout called Contacts and Links that you can get from the handout tab in your webinar window. There's also a helpful one-pager in those handouts called CRS Handouts that you can download as well, and feel free to share. So today we'll first hear from Rosa, who is the West Coast Geospatial Specialist for NOAA's Office for Coastal Management, and she'll share about NOAA's How to Map Open Space for Community Rating System Credit. We'll take a moment to pause for any questions after Melissa completes her presentation, so please type up any questions you have and send those along in the questions box. And then Laura Flessner, the GIS Manager for the Nature Conservancy's Global Oceans team, will talk about TNC's Community Rating System Explorer app. And we'll end with even more time for discussion, so be sure to get your questions in then. And with that, I will hand off to Melissa.
Great, thanks, Carrie. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, great. As Carrie mentioned, I'm Melissa Rosa. I'm with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management, West Coast region. I'm based in Oakland, California. And today I'm going to be talking about a product that our office came out with about a year ago called How to Map Open Space for Community Rating System Credit. And this was a product that we created because we were hearing that communities wanted to participate more in the CRS program, or communities that were in the program wanted to find ways to increase their rating in the program. So today I'm going to give a quick background on CRS and talk about some NOAA partners that are also creating CRS resources, and then I'm going to introduce the how-to and the steps that are involved within the product. So for those of you who are not familiar with the CRS program, it is a voluntary program within FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program, and this provides communities with discounts on their flood insurance premiums for going above and beyond the minimum flood management requirements. And one of those activities where communities can earn credit is for open space preservation. The first 5 elements of the OSP activity within the CRS program provides credit at the parcel level. So here's a breakdown of the credit. So there's the main element, open space preservation, where communities can earn up to 1,450 points, and these points translate into credit or discounts on their flood insurance. And then there's also opportunities for extra credit. So this is where communities can get even more discounts on things like deed restrictions, natural functions, open space, social flood-related hazard open space, and coastal erosion open space. And the way that FEMA calculates that credit is based on a ratio. So the numerator is the area of eligible open space over the impact adjusted special flood hazard area times that maximum number of points. So as you can see, there's a lot of math and numbers and calculations that are involved with calculating eligible credit. So NOAA wanted to create a product that helps lower the bar a little bit. So why did we focus on open space preservation? Well, as you can see, under CRS Activity 420, communities can earn a lot of credit, and then that credit turns into more discounts. It's also the mission of our office to help communities reduce their flood risk, especially related to climate impacts. I mean, as we see more intense storms happening, flooding hazards are increasing, and so by preserving the natural functions of the floodplain, this helps communities adapt quickly to these extreme events. Also, by preserving open space, there's multiple benefits that are associated with that, such as increased water quality, provides critical habitat, and also recreation. And then lastly, we wanted to create a product that was complementing other CRS tools and resources that our partners were creating as well. So just to give a quick overview of that, some of our partners who are involved with the Digital Coast Partnership, these agencies here are groups that represent the user base of NOAA's Digital Coast website. For those of you who are not familiar with the Digital Coast, it is an online repository for data, tools, and training for the coastal management community. And so as we're talking with our partners, some that you see listed here, we noticed that some were creating CRS resources as well. So we got together and created our Digital Coast Partnership's CRS strategy, and that includes ASFPM and CSO's CRS Green Guide, TNC's Community Rating System Explorer, which you'll hear about later, and then NOAA's How to Map Open Space for Community Rating System Credit. And the way that all these products feed into each other, the ASFPM CSO Green Guide, this is where you would start if you were a community that's new to CRS and wanted to learn from other communities in the program about best practices and success stories and how to make the most of the program. So then once you're in the program and you're ready to identify eligible credit, as you can see, open space preservation is really the low-hanging fruit where you can earn a lot of points. So a community can use the NOAA How-To Guide to map and identify eligible credit, and also the GIS workflow, which I'll talk a little bit later about. And then the outputs from the NOAA How-To Guide could be used as inputs into the TNC CRS Explorer, which then communities can use to engage with decision makers and prioritize future open space. So I'm going to dive right into the NOAA product. This is what it looks like when you come to the start page. And the How-To Guide is a step-by-step process. There's 7 steps, and it walks the community through the process of identifying eligible open space within their special flood hazard area and calculating eligible credit, and then getting together all the documents and maps that are required for submittal to FEMA. There's also job aids that are associated with this interactive guide, and they are these documents that are linked to the website, and this helps gather a lot of information that FEMA needs. So for example, with extra credit, natural function open space, there is some parcel documentation that needs to be gathered, and so this provides the links to those documents all in one spot. There's also a worksheet that communities can use to calculate credit, and so this allows you to enter in eligible open space and do all those calculations within an Excel spreadsheet if a community prefers. There's also a GIS workflow that is a companion document to the How-To Guide, and this is for a GIS analyst who's working with a community planner on mapping and calculating eligible open space. So I'm going to introduce the steps within the How-To through the lens of the GIS workflow, and then show you just kind of under the hood of what's going on in there. So when you first look at the GIS workflow, there is a section for GIS data sets that you'll need to do the analysis within GIS. There's also a section for how you would find those GIS data sets as well. So there's three main components to this analysis. There's the community layers, so your special flood hazard area, your community boundary, parcels, and land use. There's areas where communities cannot earn credit, and these include federal lands, open water, and impervious surface. And then there's your preserved open space layer, so your protected areas where communities can earn credit for CRS. So step one is where you calculate the impact adjusted flood hazard area. Within the GIS workflow, you'll see a workflow diagram and example maps, so you know what your goal is for this particular step. Don't worry about trying to figure out this workflow here. It's just to show that the technical process has been worked out, and all you're really doing here is following the guidance, and you're determining where your regulatory floodplain is, or your SFHA. You're removing federal lands and water bodies where a community cannot earn credit, and then you're calculating your impact adjusted SFHA, and that's the denominator of that equation that I showed at the very beginning. And then step two is where you identify lands that may qualify for open space preservation credit. Again, here this is where you identify parcels that are within the impact adjusted SFHA. You pull together all your protected areas and your land use layers, and you intersect that with the parcels within the impact adjusted SFHA to determine the parcel area eligible for OSP credit. So on the right here, you can see a map where you can see the FEMA flood zones that are within the regulatory floodplain. Areas in purple are the protected areas, and then areas in green are the areas that qualify for OSP credit. Step three is where you exclude areas that do not qualify for OSP credit within those parcels. Within GIS, this really is mapping out impervious surfaces. And there's two ways to get that, either through land cover or high resolution imagery. And then there's four options for using those types of data sets to curate the impervious surfaces. So ideally, option one, you have a high resolution land cover data set that you can reclass to impervious surfaces. Option two is where you could use a regional land cover data set to calculate percent impervious per parcel. Or option three, if you're using high resolution imagery, you could perform image classification. And option four is hand digitize impervious surfaces if you have a small community and you just want to take that route. And the workflow provides guidance where you can determine how you would go about one of these options depending on whatever is suitable for your community. So once you map out your impervious surfaces, and step four is where you calculate potential preserved open space credit. So you subtract the impervious surfaces from the parcel area that you determine as qualifying to calculate OSP credit. And this is the numerator of the calculation that you see there. And then the map on the right is showing impervious surfaces removed from that eligible parcel area. And then step five, this is where you will query your OSP parcels to determine if any of them qualify for extra credit. And this includes deed restrictions and natural function open space. We haven't worked out the other extra credit elements that you saw at the beginning yet in GIS, but these are ones where you can quickly query your parcel database for deed restrictions if available, or you can use existing layers that you use to identify preserved open space to calculate natural function open space. So these are natural areas or critical habitats, or any area that is preserved open space in its natural form. And then step six is where you gather all your documentation for each parcel. The workflow will instruct how you can create your impact adjustment map, and this is the map that you submit to FEMA showing all eligible open space within your community. And then also, this is where you would generate your list of parcels to submit to FEMA, showing area that qualifies for open space credit, parcel owner, and other required information. And a lot of this can come from the attribute table that's generated by working through the GIS workflow. This could be exported from ArcMap or whatever GIS software you're using and imported into an Excel spreadsheet that you submit to FEMA. And then lastly, step 7 is where a community can identify opportunities to earn more open space preservation credit. So this is where you will look at parcel areas within your impact adjusted SFHA that contain a high amount of natural land cover. So the parcels that you see here with the red outline are parcels that currently do not qualify for open space preservation because they do not have qualifying land regulations. But they do have high amounts of national land cover, so a community may want to engage with these landowners and see if there is a way that they could preserve this as open space and then get credit in the future. And then once you identify these areas, you can use your attribute table and sort to see which ones could potentially earn the most points in the future so that you can target those specific areas and landowners. So where you will find this how-to guide, this is on the NOAA Digital Coast, which I mentioned earlier as a training resource. It's a self-guided resource, and the link you can find below. And I also like to mention that we are currently looking for pilot communities who are interested in working through the GIS workflow and also the how-to guide, and can provide us feedback and help refine these products a little bit more. Ideally, the communities are already in the CRS program and have room to grow within the OSP activity. And we would like to find communities who are interested in demonstrating how the NOAA workflow outputs could be inputs into the TNC Explorer tool that Laura is going to be talking about afterwards. So that is all I have for you today. Welcome any questions. If you're interested in checking out NOAA Digital Coast or the how-to, here are some links that are provided. And yeah, I welcome any questions that you might have at this time.
Thank you, Melissa. I'll give folks a few moments to type in those questions and maybe copy down these URLs, and then I'll switch the presenter to Laura.
Sure.
And again, these links will show up in your chat box or also in the handout documents. They're available to you. So I'm going to go ahead and change to Laura. Please feel free to keep on typing in those questions, and if we don't get them before Laura starts, we can get to them at the end as well. Okay, so it looks like we have a question for you. Do communities have to be in CRS or just a preference?
To be a pilot community, I'm assuming. If that's the case, then it's a preference, but it's definitely not a deal breaker. We just find that communities who are already in the program are a bit more motivated to work through it, but if there is a community that wants to take the GIS workflow for a test drive, we would love to know about that.
Great, we have another question coming in. She says, thank you for the presentation. I'm not too familiar with NFIP. This is not for communities that are implementing open space in their area, but rather they are identifying open space, and that gets you the credit?
That's right. So it's communities that have a regulatory floodplain, and open space preservation needs to be calculated within that floodplain. So it's communities that are paying for insurance within the NFIP. And then there's certain requirements that a community needs to get involved within the CRS program, and then once they're in the program, then they can earn credit for preserved open space.
Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have for now. Please feel free to keep on typing those into the questions box. And with that, I will hand it off to Laura. Take it away.
Great. Can you see my screen all right?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you, Melissa. That was a great kind of introduction. I'm going to start talking about how the community that you actually just saw represented in Melissa's workflow actually used that information, and how that led to the development of our decision support tool, which is called CRS Explorer, or the Community Rating System Explorer, and how it complements the workflow that Melissa just walked through with you. So I want to give you a little bit of context before I jump in of how the CRS Explorer came to be. The Nature Conservancy had already been working with some communities in North Carolina on other projects. And what we consistently kept hearing from stakeholders is that they, especially in coastal areas like this, they really wanted to influence a shift from sort of a retroactive buyout focused flood risk approach to a more proactive approach by trying to link nature-based solutions with economic incentives back to the community. And they actually identified the CRS program as the mechanism to do this, but they also recognized that they needed help. As you saw, it's kind of a cumbersome program. There's a lot of aspects. And so that is how we decided to prioritize building a decision support tool to help them plan and prioritize specifically for the open space preservation, since that also aligns with TNC's mission. The Explorer was first piloted in 8 communities across coastal North Carolina. And these areas represented communities ranging from very tiny, densely populated townships like Duck, if you're familiar with that, on the Outer Banks, all the way to huge rural counties like Hyde County. So it was kind of challenging, but really unique to see the differences in the communities that are participating in CRS. And we've also since expanded into a couple communities in the Gulf of Mexico and Mississippi. And I do want to flag that although the examples that you're seeing today are coastal, anyone, like Melissa just mentioned, that's in the NFIP, so if you're in a floodplain, even if you're inland, you can do the NOAA workflow. It is not only applicable to coastal areas. We work in those areas already, and they've all been receiving funding from recent storms like Matthew. And so it was just opportunistic that our pilot example here was in a coastal area. But I just want to make sure that everyone knows they can absolutely participate in the NOAA workflow. And if you are in an inland area and interested in developing the tool, we can work with you. TNC has a chapter in every state, and we can work with you to figure out what strategy and what chapter will help support that. So just wanted to flag that. So who should use this decision support tool? There are some considerations. So let's say you have participated in a workshop, or you've walked through the NOAA workflow by yourself, and now you have analysis outputs, you have spatial outputs. These are some considerations to help you figure out, okay, should I take the next step, and do I need to develop a decision support tool? Are you a CRS planner? So this is for the folks that are actually assessing open space and applying for points through the CRS program. Or are you an insurance service officer that is working with FEMA to review applications that are submitted? This decision support tool has workflows for both of those audiences. So basically, do you not only want to produce the analysis, which you can do through the NOAA workflow, but do you want to visualize those data and print maps for your CRS review? Do you want to interact with those data? Do you need to engage stakeholders on the benefits of open space and the CRS program? Or do you need to make the case to decision makers to protect more open space in the floodplain? That's really where decision support tools and the ability to interact with the data really come into play versus a static analysis. So if you've gone through this and you consider, okay, this sounds like it would meet my needs, we would then advise you to get in touch with your TNC chapter, and then we can coordinate with them and figure out how to progress that along. Essentially, what you do going from the NOAA outputs is basically our web tool is built on code, and so that code looks for some specific fields in your data set. So it's a very simple process of adding the fields that our tool needs to look for to your data set that is output from the NOAA workflow. And we have some documentation of exactly how to do that. If you're familiar with GIS at all, it's pretty much just creating a join with our data schema or our required fields. So super simple, but it's just a way to format the stuff that comes out of NOAA's workflow so that our tool can recognize it easily. And once you've done that, your community is then, you work with your TNC data manager to integrate the data into the tool. So it's not as easy as going on here and uploading it. There is some pre-processing that is involved, but it's relatively easy, and we'll coordinate that with you. But once you're in, and I'd like to do a demonstration for you here, you're integrated into the tool, and we'll explore that here. So what you're looking at now, and please give me a holler, Carrie, if you're not seeing this, but is the live version of the tool in North Carolina. Basically, this is our coastal resilience mapping portal. So it includes several other applications that can be used simultaneously with the CRS Explorer. So this is the main screen that you'll see. You can go here, this is the live link, so it's maps.coastalresilience.org/North Carolina. And this is what you'll see. You'll see a main splash page with just some introductory text and some buttons that just say, take me to this application. So we're going to open CRS Explorer. And you'll see here, this is where all the communities right now that we've got data for reside. So let's go to Nags Head, North Carolina, which actually is the, let me zoom in here, the example that you just saw in Melissa's workflow. So if it looks familiar, that's where it's from. And you're presented, as soon as you click your community, you're presented with this interface. And you'll see up here that there are 3 distinct tabs that you're able to click on, and these represent 3 different workflows. The first one that is selected by default is called Download Data. And so this audience for this workflow are our planners that want to assess where they are currently in the program in terms of the open space preservation or OSP activity and where they could be. So you first see this cool graph here that shows in orange the number of published points, so that is on record through FEMA, of how many points, if any, your community has already achieved out of the possible points of the OSP activity. And then the green actually shows how many points additional to that you identified in the NOAA analysis. And so it's just a way of kind of gauging where you are and where you could be and how much room you have for improvement. This second section down here below it, called OSP Element Summary, is where we start to break down some key statistics about that specific community. So we've got things like, what is their current class standing? Nags Head happens to be a class 6. And in parentheses here, you can see that OSP contributes only 251 points out of the over 2,000 that community has. So they have some room for improvement there. It also shows them what their percent of discount is, both in the floodplain and outside, as well as their impact-adjusted special flood hazard area, which was calculated in the NOAA workflow. If you have any question about any of these at any time, you can click on the blue information icon that opens up the info tab and highlights what you had a question about and often explains what the requirements are in the manual and how that specific parameter was calculated. You can go back to the Download Data tab at any time and just click that. The rest of the statistics get into breaking down what goes into that 612 points that we've identified. So you can see several of these Melissa went over with you Open space preservation, 422A, accounts for 1,001 acres and 521 points. You can click on this to learn more about how that was calculated. Natural functions open space. This gets into some of the extra credit that Melissa started talking about. And this community actually participated in some other extra credit that's sub-elements within OSP called coastal erosion open space, which obviously is only applicable for oceanic coastal areas, as well as natural shoreline protection, which can be applicable anywhere. But these are some extra ones we just happen to have the data for, and so these communities were able to have statistics about those. So it's basically whatever analysis and statistics you're able to get from the NOAA workflow, however in detail you want to get, is what we're able to present here. If you stop at OSP and you don't, have the capacity or the data to get into the extra credit, then you'd only see those statistics here. And then we can scroll down and see our third section here, which is download data. So this is where you have the option to preview several pre-processed maps, as well as download a package of information that includes every single map as well as a Excel file of your parcel information. So all of these maps, I'll click on one here. It'll open in a new tab. All of these maps were created with the folks that actually review these maps. Once you submit them to FEMA, they usually have a contractor that will review these maps and validate, what you're claiming eligibility for. So all of these maps meet all of the requirements for all the information that's needed so that you can print them as is and put them into your application, or you can save the PDF, share it with a colleague. All of these PDFs are pre-processed and waiting for you to download them. So it doesn't take any time to create. These are already created for you. I want to focus on one more of these maps, and it's called the largest parcels map. Let me zoom out a little here. And this map is unique because it's specifically made to help the ISO, so the insurance service officer that a planner submits their CRS application to. It actually helps them because, as we understand it, one of their workflows is they get this parcel table of all these parcels that you're claiming eligibility for. They have to do physical site visits for the top 10 largest in acreage parcels. The rest of the parcels, they'll then put into a random number selector. They'll select some random parcels, and they might validate those using aerial imagery. They might do site visits for those, but they don't know those ahead of time. They definitely know they will have to do site visits for the top 10 largest. So this map is specifically for their workflow. And like I mentioned, you can preview any of these. You can save them individually. You can share them, or you can download a package that includes all of these maps as well as that parcel data table. So again, this was really for this workflow. This download data is really meant for the planner to visualize the information that you create through the NOAA workflow. This second workflow, called print parcels, again, is really focused on the ISOs. So as I just mentioned, they have a map that lets them know what the top 10 largest parcels are, but they have to randomly select other parcels to validate with imagery and create maps for. They don't know those ahead of time. So what used to be their workflow is they would then create a list of the randomly selected parcels, send it back to the planner coordinates with the GIS person, creates individual maps for those. Well, here, they can come into the tool, come into the print parcels workflow, select or enter whatever parcel that they've randomly selected. They can zoom to it. They can change the imagery, change the base map to imagery, which we'll explore here shortly, or they could view a map, a pre-processed map. And so they have everything that they need. They can save this to their files. They can print it off without needing GIS, which is critical. We also had the Southeastern ISO in our steering committee while we developed this application, and she gave us feedback that this workflow dramatically helped reduce the repetitive, iterative back and forth between her and the planner, because she can go in here, admittedly not a techie GIS person, and can create a map that is perfectly formatted for what she needs. So this we found to be really helpful for improving their workflow. All right, so the last workflow, future OSP. So this, for the Nature Conservancy and probably NOAA as well, really is the bread and butter. So yes, we want to get you points that are already on the table. We want you to explore current opportunities for open space that can get you credits right now. But we're hoping that by seeing the benefit of that, it'll spark communities to also plan for more future open space. So not only looking at the economic benefit through the CRS program, but also other benefits that might help them meet multiple goals. So if they've got water quality goals or habitat conservation or what have you, this is really the workflow that we want to push for planners to explore. So what this is you can see that we've got the same graph from before over here, and now we're pretty much hypothetically saying, okay, if we get all of these points validated and this is our new starting point, how many more points could I get for more parcels that I'm about to identify? And you'll see the graph update as we query our data set. So the key workflow here is this future OSP parcels query that we can build. So what we're going to do is query the data set for parcels that are privately owned, that are within the impact adjusted flood hazard area that we identified, and the only limiting factor is that they don't have the legal regulations in place that they are protected. So that's the only reason they're not qualifying right now as OSP. So those are the ones we're going to query. And you can build a query. If you have a specific parcel in mind, you can enter it here. But we're kind of assuming people want to explore all of their options. So that's why this show parcels by query is selected by default. And basically you create an and or query. So let's say I want eligible acreage to be greater than or less than. Let's pick greater than 10 acres. And or, let's stick with and, the tax value is greater than or less than. This allows us, let's just put in, is that 100,000? 100,000. And click find. Oh, and my computer froze. That's all right, I have a backup. Okay, so what the goal of this is to help folks find the biggest bang for their buck. So what are the parcels that will provide me potentially the largest amount of additional acreage for the least amount of money and for the least impact of taking that off the tax base if you put it into protection? So where is the biggest bang for my buck? And you can see that this query resulted in 49 potential points across 3 parcels, which you can see highlighted here in blue. You can click the drop down and see each one individually. There's several things you can sort. You can export the table of those parcels. There's also options for viewing these data sets. You can turn on and off your current open space. You can turn on and off your impact adjusted flood hazard area. And that is so that you can see, maybe perhaps you want to focus on areas to create a corridor of open space. So I want to see where my open spaces are right now to help me prioritize where I want to go in the future. The really cool niche about coastal resilience, like I mentioned at the beginning, is that you can also activate different tools. So each one of these icons is a different application. You can see here, this one's for flood and sea level rise, for living shoreline. They all have different purposes and they're customized for a specific planning purpose. And so you can overlay them. So let's overlay some other data to help us prioritize. So let's say we've got these 3, they're within our budget. It's going to give us the most points. Let's see what we can add to further prioritize these. So there's one called community planning here. you can see the interface changes to show me this app on the front, but the community rating system app is still active. It's blue colored, so we know it's still working. And let's go to Dare County, and let's say I have some habitat conservation goals in whatever land use management plan that's coming up. And I want to see what these 3 parcels are in terms of habitat. And I can see that based on a wetlands assessment that was recently done, all 3 of these parcels are exceptionally significant. And if I have a question about what that means, at any of these data layers over here have a blue information icon, just like the app did. I can click on, and it tells me all about what that means, where's the data from, and I can see that exceptional means it's a wetland, but it's also adjacent to a nursery area, or it's known habitat for threatened or endangered species, and it's identified as a unique coastal habitat. So perhaps I can use this now to make the case to put these parcels into protection, because it's not only going to give us some points in the CRS program, but it's also going to help us meet our habitat conservation goals. So all this is to show you can add whatever information would help you make the case to whomever you're trying to convince, whether it be a landowner, a decision maker, to protect this area. It can be infrastructure, it can be social vulnerability, it can be flooding. This gives you the flexibility to do that. If at any point, let's say I want to focus on one of these specifically, I can click on it in the map or select it from the drop-down and find even more information about that specific parcel. I can zoom directly to it. I can add an imagery-based map. Again, I can make this more transparent, or I can print another PDF map. So there's a lot of flexibility here for whatever you need. We want to enable a planner to help make the case to protect future open space, because that's really what we're all in it for. All right. So to briefly wrap up, how specifically did Nags Head use this information, and what were the outcomes? So they had 564 credits that were validated, and normally that would help them go from a class 6 to a class 5. However, in this area of North Carolina, they have a unique building code language that prevents them actually from advancing past a class 6. And this is a prerequisite in the CRS manual. You have to have certain language in your building code requirements, and they just don't have it. And so they actually are prevented from advancing. However, planners are using this to make the case that look at the quantitative benefits that we could actually get if we were allowed to advance past a class 6. So they would get a 25% discount. They know how many policies and how much they pay for that, so you can quantify the savings. So it would be over $737,000 across the community a year in savings. They know how many policies they have. They can whittle that down to a per policy per year savings of $198 for each policyholder. So that's a pretty significant benefit to be able to communicate, to help say, hey guys, let's change our building code regulation to actually enable us to take full advantage of this program. And some other benefits, I mentioned our ISO had a very big improvement in the efficiency of her workflow. So we are trying to integrate this tool and training the ISOs as well, trying to get into FEMA's training program for folks so that they know that this tool could be available to them. And also prioritizing future open space. We're tracking that. That's a slow process because obviously they use this tool, identify where they can go, and then it's getting that land actually set aside. So we're leaning on our TNC state chapters that have the relationships and the stakeholder engagement to inform us when a community that has used this tool has actually put more open space into protection because of the information they got from this tool. So that's an ongoing tracking our success stories. So to wrap up, Both of these tools that you've seen are only part of a larger suite of tools that, as Melissa mentioned, are all part of the Digital Coast partner organizations. So that includes the Nature Conservancy, NOAA, the Association of State Floodplain Managers, as well as others. And we're aligning with FEMA in this preservation of open space. That's where all of our missions are aligning and where we've developed these tools to help communities take advantage of those points. To figure out which one of these tools do you think you need, we've actually created a resource. It's a story map, and I can share this link in the chat box, but it's essentially just a decision tree. It asks you a couple of key questions to help get you to the tool that's right for you. And with that, these are all in the handout that Carrie shared with you in the chat box or the handouts box, whatever it's called. But these are some critical links. So first, the link to the North Carolina tool, more information about the project and how they're actually using this information, a really cool hands-on e-learning training that you can check out, as well as some funding resources, because that's usually the first question is, okay, this is all great, how do I get it funded? This website listed here has some great information about grants and some innovating tech tax mechanisms and other information to help you figure out how to fund this work, contract it out if needed, or figure out how to get to the capacity to at least do the NOAA workflow and get your community on the right track. So with that, I'll open it up to questions, and thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Laura. So please feel free to send in your questions with that questions box. We definitely still have about 10 or 15 more minutes to have a discussion. So we do have a question for you, for one of you, whoever feels like answering this one. So the question is, does protecting one eligible open space parcel decrease the flood insurance for the entire community?
Well, it could. So if it were, for example, you were 10 points off from going up to another class, the discounts are based by the class, and each class is, I think, 500 points. So let's say you were right on the edge, and that one parcel would give you 15 points. So it would bump you up a class. Your insurance discount would increase. It increases 5% for each, for folks in the floodplain. So each class you decrease or you increase 5% of your discount. For folks outside of the floodplain, I think the most discount they'll get is 10%, but it does provide a discount for the entire community.
Great, thanks, Laura. We'll give another moment or two for people to get their questions in. But as Laura mentioned, all those links that she listed are in the handouts that I put up for through your webinar window. So that'll be in the CRS_handout doc. Oh, I'm sorry. That handout doc is the one pager, and then the contacts and links have all the links that Laura and Melissa listed. It looks like there are no more questions. If you have any that come up later today or later as you're working, please feel free to reach out to these two wonderful ladies to help answer those questions. So with that, thank you to our speakers, Melissa and Laura, and thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.